This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this episode 1011 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by DraftKings. Thanks for tuning in. Football season starts this week, and there's no better way to lock in your dominance than with Best Ball on DraftKings, where you draft once and ride your roster all season long. And right now, DraftKings is giving all customers a can't-miss offer. Draft one, get one. Enter a lineup in the $15 million Best Ball contest for just $20. You'll score another Best Ball ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million, giving you a second shot to win big. It's easy. Just draft your dream team once, no weekly management required, and let your top scorers automatically start each week. Across the whole season, every breakout star, every clutch play, every touchdown will count toward your quest for a share of $15 million. So download the DraftKings Daily Fantasy app now to draft your $20 Best Ball lineup to play for a share of $15 million and get a second ticket to play free for a share of that $15 million. That's two chances to win big without ever setting your lineup again. Draft one, get one, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. 18 plus in most eligible states, but age varies by jurisdiction. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Enter the Best Ball $15 million headliner contest by 9/4/25 to get one bonus entry. $20 entry required. Reward expires in 30 days. See terms at DraftKings.com/NFL-best-ball. Sponsored by DK. Well, we've officially made it. It's the first 15 transactions episode of the season. For those of you who are new, welcome. This is the episode each week where I talk about who to buy, sell, add, and drop in fantasy football. I write a newsletter with all these recommendations, and I turn it into this podcast episode. You can find that newsletter by signing up for free over on lateround.com. So with all that in mind, let's get this season started. Add Ollie Gordon. Miami's backfield is kind of a mess right now. Devon Achane is set to return this week from this calf injury, but who knows what happens there? You never know what can happen with something like that. And then there's Jalen Wright, who had some sort of leg operation. He's going to be sidelined for a bit. And then as we know, Alexander Madison, he's been out for the year with a neck injury. So the next man up in this backfield is Ollie Gordon. Now, Gordon was a day 3 selection in last April's draft, so it's really hard for him to have a great ZAP model score. And that's my prospect model, the ZAP model. It's called the Zacharisa Adjusted Prospect Model because I'm very, very creative. Draft capital is an input in that model. So a round 6 selection, which is what Ollie Gordon was, it's going to be really hard for a player like that to have a crazy high score. But with that being said, Gordon's score was 63.4. That was way better than expected given that draft capital. The model saw him as undervalued. It gave him a low-risk draft capital delta. All that says is that the model liked him more than the NFL did. And that's because he had good size and his age-adjusted production was really strong, which isn't that much of a surprise because he won the Doak Walker Award. That's for the best running back in college football. He won that a couple of years ago. He got statistical comps in the model of James Conner and Ramondre Stevenson. Now look, Devon Achane's fantasy value, it really comes down to receiving. He's being selected high in fantasy drafts because of what he can do through the air. Last year, his running back rush share per game rate in non-injured games was 58.5%. That's a good number, it's not an elite number, and it leaves room for another running back to see some volume. And that other running back in this backfield right now is Ollie Gordon. And Gordon's still out there in 2/3 of Yahoo leagues. And for the record, when I mention the percent rostered numbers on this show, I can only work with the information that's out there. I understand that some of you are in 5, 10 fantasy leagues and he's not available in any of them. But I found that Yahoo is a good indicator for what the average league really looks like. And I'm speaking to a wide variety of people. So please don't attack me when you hear these numbers. But regardless of all that, Ollie Gordon, a very clear ad right now. Buy Drake May. So look, if you consume late round fantasy football content this summer, you're not surprised by me saying to buy Drake May right now. He, to me, was the most obvious late round quarterback of the season. We know that rushing production is really important for quarterback success in fantasy football, and Drake May gave us that as a rookie. The only full-time quarterback starters last year to average more rushing yards per game than Drake May: Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, and Kyler Murray. Drake May gave us over 4 points per game via rushing alone. As I talked about earlier this offseason on the show, second-year quarterbacks have been really good bets in that QB7 to QB18 range historically in fantasy football drafts. And that's exactly where Drake May was being drafted. And there's really some chance that you won't get another opportunity to buy into Drake May. The Patriots get the Raiders and the Dolphins over their first 2 games of the season. According to Pro Football Focus's preseason secondary rankings, both Vegas and Miami have bottom 5 pass defenses going into the season. So if Drake May goes off, his price is gonna soar. Buy Travion Henderson. So if any of you guys are fans of the fantasy footballers, which I'm sure a lot of you are, then you might have heard last week they had their fantasy MVP show, and I was featured on that show. I submitted my MVP, and my MVP was Travion Henderson. So naturally, I've got to talk him up on this first 15 transactions episode. Let's talk about the ZAP model first. Henderson looked good in that model, and that's because his breakout score, which is derived from a player's age and schedule-adjusted receiving yards per team pass attempt numbers, it was an impressive 86.4. He had 312 receiving yards on 27 catches as a freshman at Ohio State, with Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka on that same team. He still had 312 receiving yards. Now Travion Henderson is on a team with way worse pass catchers than what he competed with in college. And he's in a backfield with Ramondre Stevenson, who's coming off a season where he had a really poor yards per route run rate. And as we know at running back, that's predictive of future target share. I don't think it would be that surprising if Travion Henderson ends this season with like a 13 or 14% target share. What we should be worried about is the ground game work. But a lot of receiving volume can make up for a lack of rush attempts, a lack of rushing production. In fact, since 2011, we've seen 5 instances where a running back finished the season with a 50% to 60% running back rush share and a 13% to 16% target share. Both of those numbers, like I said last week in the Bold Predictions episode, both of those numbers are well within Travion Henderson's range of outcomes. Those 5 running backs in PPR points per game finished 18th, 13th, 12th, 8th, and 6th. I really do think a top 10 season is in Travion Henderson's range of outcomes. But he also has a really high floor because of how they're going to deploy him more than likely as a pass catcher. And just like Drake May, Henderson can get off to a hot start as well because they get the Raiders and Dolphins over the first 2 weeks of the season. Add Xavier Legette. Look, I'll just be straight up. Xavier Legette was not a draft target of mine throughout the summer. I just didn't think he was that impressive of a prospect. And in year 1, nothing really changed my opinion. I thought that Jalen Coker was the best rookie wide receiver for the Panthers last year. But as we know, Coker's now on IR. He has his quad injury. So Xavier Legette is going to get more opportunity. And look, I know a lot of people are going to say Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker, they basically play 2 different wide receiver positions. Jalen Coker's been more of a slot guy. Legette's going to play on the perimeter. But that's not really how projections work. There's only a 100% target share to go around in an offense. If there's a worse wide receiver now playing in the slot, that's going to help Teteroa McMillan and Xavier Legette, among other pass catchers in that Panthers offense. The question is, will Legette capitalize? Like I already said, I don't think he's that special of a wide receiver. He had question marks littered throughout his prospect profile when he was coming out last year. And he came through as a rookie with a pretty bad 1.19 yards per route run rate. And he had opportunity last year to really become an alpha in that offense. But I'll be honest, I've been adding him in drafts ever since that Coker injury. Because this game of fantasy football has plenty of variance. You're throwing a late round dart throw to get Legette. Or in this case, he's just sitting on the waiver wire. He's still out there in a ton of leagues. And here's one of the main reasons that I think you should be going after him. Carolina gets Jacksonville, Arizona, Atlanta, Miami, and Dallas in 5 of their first 6 games this year. Not a single one of those secondaries should scare you at all as a fantasy manager, at least not right now. So we could see some usable weeks from Xavier Legette. Add Bryce Young. So look, not having Jalen Coker, that's a slight hit to Bryce Young's overall fantasy football upside. But Young is still set up pretty well for this 2025 season. I just talked about Xavier Legette's schedule. Bryce Young is going to face that exact same schedule. There's a lot of bottom-tiered secondaries he's going to face over the first month and a half of the season. And in week 1, Carolina gets Jacksonville. That game has one of the higher totals in the slate. So at the very least, Bryce Young is a decent streamer. But also, Young wasn't that bad when he came back from being benched last year. During his 10-game finish, he averaged 18 standard fantasy points per game. He was actually providing fantasy managers with over 5 points per game via rushing. So I think when you combine all of this, you combine the schedule, you combine with how he finished last season, I think there's a chance that he's a QB1, like a lower end QB1, at least higher end QB2 to start this season, over the first month or so of the season. Sell Garrett Wilson. Okay, let's just do a little bit of math here. Okay, New York is set up to be a very run-heavy team. They lack reliable pass-catching targets, they have pretty good running backs, they have a good offensive line, and they have Justin Fields. Fields has started 44 games in his career. He's gotten to 40 pass attempts just once. He's averaged a little over 25 pass attempts per start. And those aren't all targeted attempts. When you have a pass attempt, it doesn't automatically get converted into a target. When I talk about a metric like target share, that's on total targets, not total pass attempts. So not all of those 25 pass attempts per start would equate to a pass catcher target. But let's just pretend that this season, New York does get to 25 targeted pass attempts per game. Across 17 games, in order for Garrett Wilson to hit 130 targets, he would need to see a 30.5% target share. Now, given who he's competing with, that's certainly doable. But keep in mind, he's never finished a season with that high of a target share. And we usually only see 2 or 3 wide receivers get to that 30% mark each season. That could be a really big problem. Wilson's never had a season with fewer than 147 targets. And he's also never finished a season higher than wide receiver 19 in PPR points per game. Now I know what you're thinking. DJ Moore had a wide receiver 1 season with Justin Fields just a couple of years ago. My counterpoint to that was that DJ Moore that season was unbelievably efficient. He finished with a yards per target of 10.0. His yards per route run was 2.31. Garrett Wilson has never come close to those types of numbers. Even if they're possible, we would never project that kind of production. And that's likely the type of season that we're going to need to get from Garrett Wilson for him to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. With ugly games against the Steelers and Bills to start the season, there's a chance that we immediately see Garrett Wilson's value drop a little bit. So you may need to get out right now. Add Woody Marks. The news surrounding Joe Mixon's foot, it's not encouraging at all. There's a non-zero chance that Joe Mixon just does not play this year. So the early down go-to in that Houston offense is likely Nick Chubb. But he just didn't look like himself last season coming off of that injury. I mean, get this. Entering last season, 16.7% of Nick Chubb's overall rush attempts ended up gaining 10 or more yards on the ground. Last season, that rate was 4.9%. What if Nick Chubb is just dust? Now, could Dameon Pierce be the guy? Maybe. He's not a terrible end-of-bench stash either. But we've also never seen him be much of a pass catcher in the NFL. And so that leads me to rookie Woody Marks, because Marks is a pass-catching back. His best season, 16.1% collegiate reception share, was 6th best in this year's loaded running back class. His breakout score was 12th among NFL Combine invites. Now, his receiving work was boosted a little bit because he played under Mike Leach, and Mike Leach's offenses historically had favored running backs through the air. But even when he transferred to USC last season, Marks had a 14% reception share. He was still used as that kind of player. Now, the downside analytically with Woody Marks is that he's over 24 years old already, and he's not the most athletic running back in the world. He had a 97.5 speed score. That's a little bit below average. But I don't think either of those things are massively alarming, especially for a guy that you can just add off the waiver wire right now. So who knows? Maybe Woody Marks just surprises us and he's better between the tackles than what we're projecting. And to me, he's providing something that they don't have in their other running backs right now, which is pass catching upside. And we know that pass catching upside is what we're always looking for in our fantasy football running backs. Add Chris Rodriguez. So Brian Robinson is no longer a Commander. That leaves a pretty big hole in that backfield because in 2024, Robinson handled a 64% running back rush share per game. In his 2 seasons prior, he was at 67% and 64% as well. Now, I know we're all excited about Bill Krosky-Merritt, and of the 3 backs in Washington that are fantasy relevant, I do like Krosky-Merritt the most. But don't sleep on Chris Rodriguez either. He's the one who's out there on a lot of waiver wires. Now, Rodriguez, on paper, he profiles as mostly an early down bruiser. In 5 seasons at Kentucky and college, he only caught 20 passes. In the NFL, he's only seen 3 targets, and he's listed at 225 pounds. But there was a report from The Athletic this past week, and it mentioned that Rodriguez shed some pounds this offseason. And also, quote, he worked with the wide receivers coach Drew Lieberman, intending to improve his pass catching and route running ahead of another season in Kingsbury's system, which often features running backs in the pass game. So look, maybe that means nothing, but the Commanders have arguably the most up-in-the-air backfield in the NFL right now. Krosky-Merritt, he's an unproven 7th round pick. Austin Eckler, he's still undervalued. I still think he's a good pass catcher, but he's 30 years old. And this is an offense that's projected to be a top 10 offense this season. So why not throw a dart and see what you can get with Chris Rodriguez? And the nice part about this is that we should get some information early on in the season, just based on usage. So you can always part ways if things start slow for Rodriguez. But Washington does kind of have a great schedule for Rodriguez's skill set. They get matchups against the Giants, Packers, Raiders, and Falcons over their first 4 games. Buy Darnell Mooney. So Darnell Mooney was back and practicing last week. That was the first time that he practiced since suffering a shoulder injury during camp. And there's hope that he's going to be ready for the Falcons opener. We just don't have official word yet. Regardless, I think it's encouraging news. It's good news. Hopefully he's going to be back soon. And that's really big for fantasy managers. In my opinion, Mooney was undervalued in drafts this summer. He was someone in the late round draft guide as a target. According to research in that guide, one way to find value at wide receiver in the late rounds is by looking at deep ball numbers, previous season deep ball numbers. When wideouts have high totals down the field in their N-1 season, they tend to outperform expectation in their end season, their current season. Mooney last year ranked 3rd in the NFL in 15-plus air yard receptions. He trailed only Justin Jefferson and Courtland Sutton. According to PFF data, only George Pickens, DK Metcalf, and Justin Jefferson had more 20-plus air yard catches. Those deep ball numbers were on a 21% target share per game rate last year. That's really solid. And then you add in Michael Penix. He's now starting for Atlanta. And he showed off a tendency to throw the ball down the field in 2024. He had the 2nd highest average at the target in football among 100-plus dropback quarterbacks. If we assume Mooney goes in week 1, then he's going to face the Bucs, Vikings, Panthers, Commanders, Bills, 49ers, and Dolphins over his first 7 games of the season. PFF has those secondaries ranked 22nd, 27th, 30th, 28th, 14th, 23rd, and 29th, respectively. Mooney's still out there in half of Yahoo leagues, but he could be an easy trade target as well. He's just sitting on someone's bench, so go ahead and trade for him. Add Jaden Blue. Jaden Blue is still rostered in fewer than 40% of leagues. That number should be closer to 80%. The Cowboys are entering the season with huge question marks at running back. You have Javonte Williams, who's probably going to see the most work to start the year, but he's gained 10 or more yards on fewer than 10% of his carries over the last 2 seasons. In Denver last season, Williams was worst among all the team's running backs in rushing yards over expected per rush, yards after contact per attempt, and EPA per rush. And there's also Miles freaking Sanders. Now, maybe Sanders just surprises all of us, but he hasn't been relevant in 3 seasons. He's essentially on the wrong side of the running back age cliff too, or at least he's really, really close. So why wouldn't we want to invest in Jaden Blue? Despite his smaller frame, he actually scored really well in the ZAP model because he had pretty good age-adjusted receiving. He's also electric with the ball in his hands. That gives the Cowboys a backfield element that they just don't have in Williams and Sanders. Now, it's doubtful that Jaden Blue is going to be a bell cow for the Cowboys. He only had 214 rush attempts in college. But there's a real chance that he starts the season with some manufactured touches. And if he does well on those touches, his talent might just be undeniable. I could see a scenario where Dallas uses him like Tony Pollard earlier on in his career. The difference, though, between Blue and Pollard is that ahead of Blue is not a star running back in Ezekiel Elliott. It's Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. Add Tory Horton. So another day 3 pick that the Zap model liked was Tory Horton, and the Seahawks seem to like him too. He's gotten a lot of praise out of Seattle over the summer. Head coach Mike McDonald at one point, he said, quote, "I'm seeing the same thing that you guys are when talking about Horton's strong play." And then he later added that Horton's, quote, "making multiple plays every day." I mean, some of his teammates are calling him Jerry Rice Jr. Horton had a really solid Zap score of 70.4, and he's the only day 3 wideout from this year's class with a breakout score above 50 and a career first downs per route run rate above 10%. His best season in yards per team pass attempt was a very, very impressive 3.51. Now look, guys, day 3 wide receivers rarely work out. So take all this with a grain of salt. But when there's camp hype and when there's a good Zap profile, I'm going to lean in. He's the right kind of end-of-bench stash. Sell Baker Mayfield. Now, you've heard me talk about Baker Mayfield's upcoming regression all summer long. You even heard about it last week on the Bold Predictions episode. And I'm going to use that exact same example on today's show. Because the easiest way to explain this is with touchdown rate. Mayfield was at a 7.2% rate last season. That's a number that he's never come close to outside of 2024. Since 2011, 15 qualified quarterbacks with next season data have been between a 6.7% and 7.7% touchdown rate. That's plus or minus 0.5 percentage points from Mayfield's rate. Those 15 quarterbacks averaged 21.4 standard fantasy points per game in their high touchdown rate season. The following year, they averaged 17.2 points per game. Every single quarterback saw a dip in fantasy points per game. It's just really hard to sustain such a high touchdown rate. And with Liam Cohen gone, it's going to be even tougher. Not only that, but after Tampa Bay's game against Atlanta this weekend, the schedule's actually kind of tough. They get the Texans, Jets, Eagles, and Seahawks over their following 4 games. Each of those teams rank in PFF's top 12 secondary rankings entering the season. Now, maybe you want to just wait until week 1 is over to trade away Mayfield. That's understandable. I think he's in a good spot this week against Atlanta. Just know that not only is regression coming for him, but so is this tougher early season schedule. Add Chig Okonkwo. If you were to just dumb down what we're looking for in a late round tight end, it would probably be this. You want a guy that has athleticism and who could also be a top 2 pass catcher on his team. It's that simple. Chig Okonkwo checks those boxes. Outside of Calvin Ridley, who's going to be the Titans' number 2 target getter? I like Alec Iamaner, but who knows what's going to happen this year? There's a very real chance that no wide receiver steps up for them. Okonkwo ran a significant number of routes with Cam Ward during the preseason, and he's got a really efficient season under his belt. As a rookie, he had a 2.62 yards per route run rate. My voice just cracked there because it's such an absurd number. Now, we might not feel great about Okonkwo this week against Denver, so there could be an opening to add him next week. But I'd rather just get ahead of it. Because if Okonkwo has really good peripherals, if he has like a really good route participation and a really good target share, even if the production's not there, he's still going to be featured in a lot of waiver wire articles. So you want to be ahead of it and add him now. Buy JK Dobbins. So if you listen to last week's Bold Predictions episode, this transaction might not be that surprising either. Because last week I boldly talked about JK Dobbins and teammate RJ Harvey both finishing as top 24 running backs in fantasy football this year. And Sean Payton has a lot to do with that prediction. Since at least 2011, his offenses have ranked in the top 6 in running back target share in every season that he's been a head coach. And that's turned into fantasy production. Even last year, with absolute dust at running back, the Broncos, they were pretty average in PPR points scored. There's a very real chance that JK Dobbins opens up the season as Denver's starter. And that could be huge for fantasy football because not only is he running behind a great offensive line within a great scheme for running backs, but the Broncos will face the Titans, Colts, and Bengals in 3 of their first 4 games. Those games against Tennessee and Indianapolis, those could be great positive game scripts for Denver's running backs. And then Cincinnati, they're entering the year once again with one of the worst defenses in football. So I think at the end of September, when we look back, JK Dobbins could be one of the better running backs in fantasy. Add the Arizona Cardinals defense. Look, none of us are excited about using the Cardinals this week, but they get Spencer Rattler and the Saints. They are on the road, but they're 5.5-point favorites. That makes them a streaming option. But if you can't get the Cardinals, I don't mind the Rams either. They're at home, they're favorites, and they get a Houston offensive line that has a lot of question marks. So it's the first week of the season. This is the first 15 transactions episode of the season, and you're getting kind of 16 transactions instead of 15. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm so glad football is back. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the weekly 10 Trends episode.